My name is Randy Ruge, and I am with the Nebraska Veterans Memorial Foundation's Share Your Story project. Bellevue University is a sponsor of the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Park project. I am here at Bellevue University Military Veteran Service Center with Mike Steffen, an Army veteran, who has agreed to share his story for the Library of Congress Vietnam Veterans History Project and the Nebraska Vietnam Memorial Park project. Hello, Mike. Let's go ahead and begin. Can you give me your full name and where you were born?
My name is Michael Leroy Steffen. I was born in Osmond, Nebraska, January 8, 1947.
Can you tell us a little bit about your parents and your family, your siblings?
Sure. My parents were Leroy and Hilda Steffen, and my dad worked for the REA on the rural electric, and my mom, she worked in a nursing home. I have two older sisters who are both deceased. Oldest sister Carol and my other older sister Judy. And we lived in town in Osmond, and just a small town of about 800 people, and it was a good town to grow up in. Went to 8 years of grade school at St. Mary's Catholic School and 4 years of high school at Osmond Community School. Graduated in 1965. After graduation from high school, I went to Wayne State College. I was kind of putting myself through college more, trying to save my money, had a little bit saved, and my parents helped as much as they could, but mainly it was putting myself through. And I went 2 years at Wayne State and basically ran out of money. And my buddy Denny, he was kind of a high school classmate of mine. He was going to the university, and he was kind of in the same situation. This was in 1967, kind of at the big build-up of the Vietnam War, and he and I came up with the crazy idea that if we volunteered for the draft, maybe we could go in together and maybe get stationed together and serve together. Well, the best laid plans of mice and men. Anyway, we contacted the draft board, Pierce County Draft Board, and asked if we could volunteer for the draft, if we could go in February. That would be February of 1968. And the draft board said, our quota is 2 for February, and you guys can be it. We wanted to be home over the holidays and spend Christmas with our families before we went into the Army, and honestly do a little partying and have some fun before we went into the Army. So we were bused down to Omaha to the induction center, and we were sworn in together and flew to Fort Lewis, Washington for basic training. My buddy's last name was Sneckloth, and it started with an S, and my name being Steffen, also starting with S, we were one behind each other in line. And I don't know, somewhere in the wee hours of the morning, after we were arrived at Fort Lewis, they were dividing us up into training companies. And Denny, my buddy Denny, was the last person to go into Alpha Company, and I was the first one to go into Bravo Company. So the very first night we got separated in basic training. And we never saw each other again until we got home after AIT. After basic training, I got my orders to go to Fort Knox, Kentucky for my AIT training, which was 11 Delta 20, which had a fancy name, Armor Intelligence Specialist. Well, reported to Fort Knox and started training as an armor scout. And we took our training on M113. It's a light armored vehicle, and did our training on that for most of the time. You want me to just continue, Randy?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. My dad, when I went in, my father in Osmond was dealing with cancer, with colon cancer, and not doing real well. But I went through 8 weeks of basic, and I was probably 7 weeks through AIT at Fort Knox, and I received word from the Red Cross that my father was not doing well at all. And I asked for emergency leave to go home to spend a couple days with my father. And I was granted, went home to Osmond. I believe I was home for 3 days. My dad was in the hospital. I guess you could say he was on his deathbed. So I got to spend a little time with him, and then had to report back to Fort Knox. In the meantime, my AIT company graduated from AIT. I wasn't there. I missed graduation. But I had to report back for what they call jungle training. So while I was there, well, I got to back up a little bit. After I came back, while I was in AIT training, I got word that my father passed away. And I got my orders for Vietnam the same day. And that was pretty tough day. So then I went and talked to the chaplain, and what a wonderful officer, gentleman. And he offered me a lot of guidance. We talked a lot, and I told him about my family situation, didn't have any other brothers, and he said, okay, I could go home then for my father's funeral, but then I had to report back to Fort Knox, Kentucky. He said to come see him when I got back, and he would have orders for me, and I would not have to go to Vietnam. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good deal. So I went home and for my father's funeral, back to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and that's when I had to go through the jungle training. It was, I think, about a week-long training of what to deal with, how to deal with my upcoming deployment to Vietnam. So I went to see the chaplain. He had the orders all ready for me, and he told me, he said I had to report to my next duty station, which would be Oakland, California, to the trans station. That's where soldiers went that were going to be deployed to Vietnam. He said, you take these orders and you turn them in when you get to Oakland, and you won't have to go to Vietnam. They'll assign you to another Army post, probably someplace as close as possible to where my mother lived. I guess that would be Fort Riley, Kansas, or Fort Carson, Colorado. So anyway, I got to California, and I was really torn about what to do with those orders, whether I should turn them in or not. And as it turned out, I did not turn them in. I took them with me to Vietnam, and they went in the trash. I guess I just felt it was my duty to go and serve where I was supposed to go. Several of my buddies, including my high school friend Denny, he was going to Vietnam as well. And most of the guys that I was going through training with at Fort Knox, Kentucky through AIT, they were going to Vietnam also. And we were all reporting about the same time. So I went home. I had 30 days leave before I had to report to California for deployment to Vietnam. And my high school friend Denny, he was home on leave those same days, so we got to spend some time together, and then we both had to report to California then to the trans station for deployment to Vietnam. You take a minute?
Yep.
Is that okay? So then I was sent to Vietnam, and I don't remember what they called it, but it was where new guys in country reported, and waiting to be assigned to whatever unit. And I did run into Denny there, and I think we were together one day. We had some light duty that we had to do, probably painting something. They say in the Army that if it moves, pick it up. If it doesn't, paint it. So we had some duty painting something. And then he went to the 25th Infantry Division, and I was assigned to the 11th Armored Cavalry. I was at that stationed for, I think, just a couple days, and then taken by helicopter. Well, I was given my fatigues and some other stuff. I don't remember exactly if that's when I was issued my rifle and steel pot and flak jacket. Doesn't matter. But so then I was taken by helicopter to the 11th Armored Cavalry, and I was assigned to the headquarters company, headquarters troop of I Troop, 3rd Squadron, 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. And the 11th Cav, we had 3 squadrons, and each squadron had, I think, 5 troops, 5 line troops, and a headquarters troop. And then each line troop had 8 armored combat assault vehicles, which had a 4-man crew. There was a driver, the track commander, and 2 machine gunners. But I was assigned to a headquarters troop, and I wasn't going to be going out with the guys in the line troop. And it just seemed like that was just do a lot of monkey business in that headquarters troop. And I asked the top sergeant if I could be reassigned to one of the line troops, and he assigned me to I Troop, 2nd Platoon, and I was on track number 22, and double deuce they called it, and I was a machine gunner. And I don't know how many months it was that I was a machine gunner, and then the driver, his year was up in Vietnam, so he went home, and my track commander asked me if I wanted to be the driver. So I said, sure, I'll try that. Well, that was an experience. The driver is in charge of the maintenance of the ACAV. So you had to make sure the fluid levels were all maintained, and if you threw a track, you were the guy that had to oversee fixing it, and not to mention having to drive the track. We called them tracks rather than ACAVs, just for brevity. So if you were the track driver, you were, no matter what time of the day we were called out for action, you were the guy behind the laterals. The laterals are the 2 big levers that you pull to steer the vehicle. And sometimes we would be going as fast as we could across rice paddies and fording streams as best we could, and sometimes we were just driving, just mowing over jungle, just mowing down jungle in search of North Vietnamese soldiers and Viet Cong, and searching to make contact, searching for enemy camps, I guess you'd say. But it was those vehicles could just mow down all those bamboo trees and brush, and but it was but you had to be careful. Sometimes if you weren't careful, you'd end up driving through the jungle and you'd end up driving into a bomb crater where the Air Force had dropped bombs and made big holes in the ground, and you didn't want to drive into one of those. And it was a challenge getting back out. Fortunately, I never did. One time we were driving, busting jungle, and drove over this one bamboo tree, and a big nest of fire ants fell out of the bamboo tree and onto our track, and we had ants everywhere. Fortunately, we had insect repellent issued to us and insect killer spray cans issued to us, and it was seemed like it was days before we got rid of all those ants. They're not fun. But and then another fun experience as a driver during the dry season. There's basically 2 seasons in Vietnam: the wet season and the dry season. And when it's dry, it's very dry. And when it's wet, it rains every day. And driving the track vehicle on a dusty, dirty road is not fun. And what maybe is even worse than that is trying to drive that vehicle at night. If we got called for a reaction and take off in the middle of the night, there were no streetlights in the jungle. If you were lucky, there was some moon that helped you could see some silhouettes by. But other than that, so if we were driving one track behind another, you had to watch. There was a little red light on the back of each one, and you had to keep that red light in focus and not get too close in case the guy in front of you stopped, the track in front of you stopped, and you didn't want to get too far behind for obvious reasons. But that was a challenge being a driver, but part of the experience, I guess. And then after a couple months doing that, I went back to being a machine gunner again. And that was probably the best job on the crew. We lived on that. I called it my mobile home. It was our 4-man crew. We slept, we fought, we ate. That was our home. Most of the time we ate sea rations, which come in a little cardboard kit. There was usually a main entree. It might be beans and weenies, or spaghetti and meatballs, or ham and eggs, but it was in a can. And then there was a little dessert, might be peaches, little can with 4 or 5 slices of peaches in syrup, or a fruit cocktail, or something like that. and then usually a couple crackers, and if you were real lucky, you got a sea ration that had pound cake in it. That was always a favorite dessert out of the sea rations. And then it always had a little sundry pack in it that had a little package of I think it was 4 cigarettes. I didn't smoke, but those cigarettes were always good to use for trading, especially with the Vietnamese, especially if you had menthol cigarettes. And there was always a couple chiclet chewing gum, a little roll of toilet paper, and a tropical chocolate bar. Now those tropical chocolate bars, if you can imagine a piece of chocolate about 2 inches long and about 1.5 inches wide, maybe 3/8 of an inch thick, that wouldn't melt in 100-degree temperature. Yeah, they were not good. As a matter of fact, the Vietnamese children, if we were in a village, were always begging stuff from us. If you throw them one of those chocolate bars, they'd throw it right back at you. They were not good. And then toward the end of my service, I was assigned to be the track commander of one of the vehicles, of one of the ACAVs. The track commander of the vehicle had a kind of a cupola in the middle, and the track commander manned the 50 caliber machine gun, and then the 2 machine gunners to the back, one on each side, manned M60 machine gun. So they packed a lot of firepower, and if we would go online, kind of like shoulder to shoulder, if you want to say, and assaulted a wood line or whatever, and opened up, there was a lot of lead flying. Sometimes in our, we did different things. Our outfit was very mobile. That was one of the big advantages of the 11th Armored Cavalry. We could, at the drop of a hat, if we were needed as a reactionary force because some other unit made contact with the enemy and needed reinforcements, we could load up and we were on the road in 5 minutes and heading to their direction to give them assistance. But sometimes we would pull convoy security, where trucks were hauling supplies, fuel, water, other ammunition supplies from one area to another. We would drive with them. They didn't have any kind of, the drivers had their M16 rifles and that's about it. So we if they were traveling through unsecured areas, we would provide the safety for them, the support. So if there was ever an ambush or made contact with the enemy, we could provide the firepower, and that was pretty easy duty. And sometimes we would pull security for Rome plows, ROME, and they got their name because they were manufactured in Rome, Georgia. I found that out. And but they were just like big bulldozers with a big blade on the front, and it was a heavy blade with a sharp edge, and they would mow down jungle, just like you see pictures of combines harvesting wheat, driving across the wheat field, one just to one side and behind the other, one combine. Well, that's the way these Rome plows did, and they just mowed down jungle. And the idea was to expose enemy hideouts, camps, things like that. But they also didn't have any firepower, so we would move with them and provide firepower if they ran into an enemy camp or made contact of any kind. Sometimes we were just out busting jungle. If another unit or some spotter flying in the air made enemy contact, then we could react quickly and come to their aid or even initiate the contact. That was when it got hairy. Sometimes we would do what we call dismounted ambush patrols. When we set up for the night, we would try to find a clearing, and we would circle our ACAVs, kind of like a covey of quail, all in a circle, and then with our machine guns pointing to the outside, and then then one guy from each track, each ACAV, one guy from each ACAV would pack up his gear and go out on foot and set up a dismounted ambush of trail or a dry creek bed or some place that we were suspected the enemy was using to get from one place to another during the night. And those were not fun either. I remember one night during the rainy season, like I said, when it rained, it just seemed like it rained all the time. So we were out I was out with I think 5 other guys on a dismounted ambush patrol. We'd be out there all night. And I had my M60 machine gun and set it up, and the barrel was on a tripod, and we took turns sleeping. You'd pull 2 hours on and then sleep for 4 hours, and then 2 hours guard again, watching the trail or the creek bed, whatever. And I had been asleep for a few hours, and I was awakened when it was my turn for guard, and here it had rained so much, that my machine gun was completely underwater. All was sticking out was the end of the barrel. And fortunately, we didn't have any action that night. I don't know if it would have fired or not, but that was not good. It wasn't all bad times. I mean, there were times when we had some downtime. When I arrived in country, the 3rd Squadron was back at base camp. That was in July of 1968 when I arrived in country. And we left then about a week later, and we never came back to base camp until it happened to be around Christmas. So we happened to they had left one squadron back at the base camp, and the other 2 squadrons were out in the field. And it was our turn back at base camp, and it just happened to be before Christmas, so I got to spend Christmas back at base camp. Then it was I think it was my birthday, January 8th. We left base camp, headed back out to the field, and we never came back to base camp. I never came back to base camp until I left country the next July. So I suppose I was out in the field out of 50. Our hitch in Vietnam was 1 year, and everybody was counting down their days, and that was always a big deal when you got down to 2 digits. But so out of the 52 weeks that I was in Vietnam, we were out in the field probably 48 of those 52 weeks. So we never did get to sleep in a hooch or a cot or a mattress bed. We slept on our ACABs just wherever we could. I had a hammock that I tied up that I slept in. It reached from one end of my ACAB, one end of the ACAB to the other. And some of the guys during the rainy season, we all had to sleep inside. And one guy would be in the turret with a poncho over him on guard duty. We had to take turns guard duty, 2 hours on and 6 hours off. And saw some of the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen in my life in Vietnam. It always made me think of home. I was not married. I had been dating Mary Stanishek from Osman, and I was looking forward to coming home to her. We were not engaged, but she wrote to me every day. I wrote to her when I could. Certainly wasn't every day. As it turned out, she kept all of my letters and I kept all of her letters, so we still have all the letters that we sent back and forth while I was in Vietnam. She was still in high school, and she always tells me that's how she spent her homeroom period, was writing to me. So, but, and I always, it was just kind of a dumb little thing of mine. When we would be out on ambush patrol or at night, or if I was pulling guard duty on my ACAV, I would look at the moon, and especially, you know, it was special if it was a full moon. And I always just kind of thought in my mind, you know, that's the same moon that Mary looks at. And of course, different time zones, other side of the world. But I thought, oh, tonight she'll look at that moon and maybe she'll think of me. And it just, I always felt like it was just kind of a little connection to Mary and to my mom and family back in the world, as we used to say. Served with some really good guys. Golly, I just love those guys from all parts of the country. And I've been asked, you know, would you do it again? And I always say I don't know. And because I don't know. But I always add the caveat that if I did, I would want to do it with the same guys that I served with. And just guys that had your back, you had theirs, they had yours. Didn't matter what race, religion, where you were from, but you knew you could depend on them. I'm just kind of rambling here, but when we were back at base camp for like I said, when we happened to be there over Christmas, I think we left base camp on January 8th, I think it was, my birthday. And we were on what we called a road march. And it was just dead heading down the road. Now the road might be just a dirt road, or it might be a blacktop road. It just depended on where we were going. And it would just be one track after another, one after another, one after another. You got a whole squadron driving down this road, hell bent for election. And we were traveling down a dirt road, and just out of the blue, kaboom, we drove over a landmine. We called them landmines back then. Now they call them IEDs, I think. But same thing. We drove, and to this day, we don't know why. One of the things that we always were careful when you're driving in line, the driver was always careful about driving down the track of the vehicle in front of them to avoid running over a landmine that might be off to the side of the road or whatever. But for some reason, the landmine blew up when my track ran over it. And things got kind of foggy, let's say. I remember bits and pieces of what happened. I remember I was hurt. My back hurt, my head hurt, and I wasn't bleeding anywhere, but my back hurt, and some guys came. I remember that. I remember I couldn't hear anything, and I had this ringing in my ears, still do. But they helped me off of the ACAV and got me laid down on the ground. The medic came and looked at me and checked out me, and I don't know if any of the other crew members got hurt or not. But the commanding officer, who would be probably who would have probably been a lieutenant colonel, was flying above in his helicopter. He saw the explosion. He landed, and he got off, and I don't remember if he's the only one or if there were two guys got off, but they put me on his helicopter and they flew me to the closest field hospital, and that's where I was for about a week, I guess it was. And usually in Vietnam, when someone got wounded, they would call in what we called a dust off. There was a medevac helicopter would come in and load up the injured soldiers and fly them back to the nearest field hospital or aid station, whatever, where they could get medical attention. But the squadron CO commanding officer, he landed his helicopter. They didn't wait for a dust off. They just loaded me up, and I didn't have a life-threatening injury. It wasn't like I was bleeding to death or anything like that. But they took me to the hospital, and they, because of my back injury, they took the mattress off the bed and laid it on the floor, so they said the bed was too soft, and they wanted a hard bed for me for my back. So didn't like that very much, but anyway. But
did you receive any accommodations for that?
I received a Purple Heart. Yes, sir. In Vietnam, one of the things that we had to be wary of was malaria. It was spread by mosquitoes and whatever other means, I guess. And so we were expected to take a little malaria tablet. It was a little one once a day, a little white one once a day, and then once a week there was another orange one that was quite a bit bigger than a aspirin. But and I was pretty conscientious about taking those. A lot of guys had reactions to it, especially taking that big one. But while I was in the hospital, they brought in another GI. This is off the subject, but kind of interesting. They brought in another GI and laid him on the bed. He was, you could tell he was brought in right out of the field. He had his steel pot and flak jacket, and he had his M16 rifle, and he was dirty like I was and when I arrived. And they gave him a couple blankets, and that poor guy was just shivering. And I asked the orderly, I said, what's his problem? And they said he had malaria. So pretty soon the doctor came and looked at him, and doctor and an orderly, a medic, came and looked at him, and they left. Pretty soon here come two medics. They had a stretcher, set it on the floor, and they had a rubber blanket, laid it out over the stretcher, and got the GI up and took off all his clothes and laid him on the rubber blanket on the stretcher on the floor. And here come another medic with a blue wash pan with a block of ice in it and about 4 bottles of alcohol. They dumped in that basin with the ice, and they took sponges and started just soaking that soldier down with that ice cold alcohol to obviously break his malaria fever. And I felt so sorry for that guy, and he just shook and moaned. And then I left the hospital before he did, but I know he was recovering, but he was still there when I left the hospital. And then I was just taken back out to the field.
You went back to your command?
Back to my unit. Back to my, we had a different area of operation, and but yeah, if you're able, they send you right back out.
Was there a certain part of Vietnam that you were in?
Our area of operation was mainly north of Bien Hoa, Bienhoa, which was a big military base. We worked north of there and west of there in the, I think they call it the 3 Corps area. We worked in a Michelin rubber plantation sometimes. The Viet Cong liked to hide in the rubber trees, and these rubber tree plantations are just the trees all grow in a row, and you get into the rubber tree plant, you get into them, and there's a row whichever way you look. And they were just far enough apart for us to drive our ACAVs through, and we would, sometimes the Viet Cong would have bunkers hidden in there. And they used that Michelin rubber, Michelin tires, so that's where they got their rubber, some of it anyway. But my friend Denny, he was assigned to the 25th Infantry when I was assigned to the 11th Armored Cavalry, and we wrote back and forth, and our plan was to go on R&R together. Everybody gets a week's vacation, I guess you could call it, and there were different places that you could sign up to go to. our plan was to meet in Australia. So I signed up for Australia, and he signed up for Australia, and I was in country about 8 months, and I got assigned Australia, and so did Denny. Well, then at the last minute, he didn't get to go. I don't remember what exactly happened, but I was taken to Tan Son Air Base, which is in Saigon, and I was at the barracks there, where guys gathered to go on their R&R. And Denny arrived, and we got to spend a few hours together, and then he had to go someplace else. He had to go back to his unit or something, but anyway. So then I went on R&R with a couple of my other buddies from my 11th Cav unit, and we were in Australia for a week and toured around, did some partying, and then it was back to your unit, back to the line unit, and we were the big push was gearing up to go into Cambodia. That was toward the I guess you would say probably April, May, or probably May, June of 1969. The scuttlebutt was that we were going to go into Cambodia, and it got down to about time when they were getting organized to make the run toward Cambodia. The top sergeant, I only had like, that was in late June, and they were getting ready to go, and top sergeant told me, he says, "Steffen," he says, "you're not going with us." I thought, oh, what did I do now? And he says, "I want you to we got some ACAVs that are in need of repair. I want you to take them to Quan Loy to get repaired or replaced, and you won't be making the move with the rest of the troop to Cambodia." And I said, "Okay, Top." Because I was getting what we called short. I had less than 30 days left by then, and they were expecting a lot of action when they get to Cambodia, and so I thought, well, that's a good place not to go. So so then my last assignment was to move ACAVs. I think we were around an area called Phuc Vin, and then I was assigned to move ACAVs to Quan Loy, where we had a bigger base. It was a forward staging area where they brought supplies into, and then from there they would bring them out to the field. And it was a pretty big base, and didn't have to pull any guard duty when I was back there. But it was the country of Vietnam was, some of it was beautiful, most of it was just poor villages, and we never really got into any cities. The only time I was ever in Saigon was when I went on R&R. We traveled through some little villages of poor farmers, rice farmers, and kids running around, very, very poor, and my heart broke for them. But what do? You just keep on doing what you're told and move on. You never knew, some of these farmers stand by the road and wave at you as you're driving through their village, but at night they might be shooting mortars at you too. You didn't know if they were Viet Cong or just a poor farmer. You didn't bother them, and they usually didn't bother us. Nighttime, once the sun goes down, then it was pretty much free fire. If there was somebody out, they were up to no good. And those are some of the operations that we went on in Vietnam. Served with a lot of good men, lost a lot of good men, lost some buddies, but I've been blessed to have survived, and dealing with some issues. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is always a lot of the guys come home dealing with symptoms of PTSD in varying degrees. I still have some problems with my back. Receive some compensation from the VA. Get all my health care from the VA. Been very happy with the VA healthcare system. Keep in touch with some of my few of my buddies from Vietnam. Years ago, I get a phone call. The 11th Armored Cavalry, I'll back up a little bit. The 11th Armored Cavalry has an organization, and it's a very well-run organization. We have a reunion every year, and it's just veterans of Vietnam, 11th Armored Cavalry, and some of the units that were assigned to us, like the engineers and the engineers and the medical people. There's a transportation company. They're all invited to our reunion also, and it moves around the country. And I get a call from one of the guys I've served with. Steffen, are you going to the reunion? Nah, man, I don't think so. Oh, you gotta come to the reunion. We'd love to see you. So-and-so's gonna be there. So-and-so's gonna be there. And I just, because of my PTSD, I just never really felt comfortable doing that. And I was talking to a VA psychologist, and I was telling her about the phone call that I got from one of my buddies, and she said, so are you going to the reunion? And I said, no. I said, I just not comfortable. And she said, well, where is it? And I said, well, this year it's going to be in St. Louis. And she said, well, that's not real far. You could drive down there, couldn't you? Oh, yeah. I said, we could. My wife, Mary, who I ended up marrying, has a cousin there. And my psychologist says, well, I think you should sign up for your reunion, and I think you should go. And I kind of argued with her, I guess you would say, a little bit. And she finally said, well, you know, what's the worst? She said, what's it cost for the registration? And I said, I don't know, I think it was like $80 a piece back then. And she said, well, you know, you pay your registration fee, go, and if you're really uncomfortable, you don't have to stay. You can go see Mary's cousin, or you can just go see the town of St. Louis. And I talked to Mary about it and prayed about it, and finally we decided that we were going to go. So Mary and I made our reservations, and we went to the hotel there in St. Louis, checked in the hotel, and they directed us to the registration, the reunion registration desk down the hall, across the lobby. So Mary and I are walking across the lobby, and here comes, and there's 11 Cav guys all over, 11 Cav t-shirts and jackets and caps, and we're didn't know any of them. We're walking across the lobby, and here comes 4 guys walking across toward us, shoulder to shoulder, and we're just kind of walking, and this one guy stopped, and he says, Steffen? And I stopped, what? He said, are you Mike Steffen? And I said, well, yeah. He says, it's me, Mark Chris. I said, oh. And it was 4 of my buddies from Vietnam. He recognized me after, I don't know, back then it was 40 years, I guess, something like that. So lots of hugs, and then we spent the weekend together, had a great time. And Mary and I have gone to, since then we've gone to reunions in Orlando and Las Vegas and Indianapolis, Grand Rapids. Where else? We've gone Chicago. We've gone to a lot of reunions, and this next year it's going to be in Omaha.
Oh, wow.
For the very first time. So since that first reunion, one of the guys, John, he lost his life to bladder cancer, and just a year ago, this Mark that I ran into walking across the lobby, he took his own life. And my heart, another vet suicide, but just, anyway.
Those are hard.
Oh, terrible. But Mary, she kept writing me those letters. She was still her senior year in high school. And I got back and she was off to Mitchell, South Dakota for nursing school, and I was stationed in Fort Riley, Kansas when I got back from Vietnam. And my mom and she met me at the airport in Norfolk, and so I was home for 30 days and got to spend some good time with Mary and the rest of my family, my sisters and nephews and nieces. But then I had to report back to Fort Riley, Kansas. My full 2 years was coming up in February. So I still had basically 6 months Army obligation left. And my buddy Danny, he was also stationed in Fort Riley, Kansas. He was wounded in Vietnam, received 3 Purple Hearts, and survived them all in good shape. And he was stationed in Fort Riley, Kansas. And then he got out before I did, and started school at the University of Nebraska. And then I got out a month early. I got out in January. I got an early out so I could start school at the University of Nebraska in, would have been then January of 1970. Yeah. And then Mary finished her nursing school in May of 1970, and we got married in November of 1970. So we have our 53rd anniversary coming up
Congratulations.
in a couple weeks. So
Do you and your friend Denny still get together?
he lives in Lincoln, he and his wife, and we see them a couple times a summer. They spend the winter in Arizona. So yeah, we keep in close contact, and yeah.
You were able to maintain some good friendships through all that.
Yes. In my in these 11th Cav reunions that I've been able to attend, and visiting with the guys that I served with, reminiscing about our time in Vietnam together and this and that. And I was saying about when we hit that landmine, and Wayne, who is sitting at the table, he says, "Mike," he says, "I was driving that ACAV when we hit that landmine." And like I said, it was all pretty foggy after that. And I remember who the track commander was, but I didn't remember who the driver was, or who the other machine gunner was, or if any of them got hurt. But Wayne said that nobody else got hurt, badly anyway. And yeah, he said he said they really raked me over. I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well," he said, they grilled me about hitting that landmine, whether I was not following the track in front of me, and whether I was not got off, and he said, "But I never did." So, yeah, I got to, plus I've met a couple other guys at these reunions and kind of gotten friends with, I keep in touch with, and
Good.
yeah. But it's,
What was the hardest part of military life to adapt, that you had to adapt to?
you know, it doesn't matter what your job is. Some jobs are harder than others physically. Some jobs are harder than others mentally. But I've always thought, no matter what your job is, we all deal with one big problem, and I would say it was probably the hardest part of my service was being separated from family.
Okay.
And Mary. Being separated from your loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, when you had to be in Vietnam for a year, or men and women that have served in wherever in overseas and separated from their family, doesn't have to be in combat.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that and it was the hardest part for me.
That's totally understandable.
Yeah.
What was the hardest part of transitioning out of the military then? Or did you have trouble transitioning back?
You know, Vietnam War was not a popular war, and I got out of the Army, came home in 1969, in the summer of 1969, and that was right during a lot of the 68, 69 was the biggest buildup in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War, and that's when there was a lot of protests and stuff. I was never spit on like some of my buddies were. I can't say I was very disrespected because of my service, but I think a lot of that is because of coming home to a small town. They were just worried about their hometown boys getting back alive. And we did lose one young man from Osmond, killed in Vietnam. And then when I got out of the service, I went immediately into college and sharing an apartment with my buddy Denny and another friend of mine that was in the Army. He was had been in Thailand. So I had friends there that, you know, so and my sisters and my mom, and you know, I had a lot of friends that I had good support there, and so it wasn't a big problem for me transitioning back into civilian life.
Is there anything you'd like the people to remember from your story?
You know, I feel I feel so, I have such strong feelings for other veterans, and I appreciate so much the support that we veterans get from other people. But there are a lot of us veterans that are not as fortunate as I am, that still need a lot of support. And they need to not be looked down upon. A lot of their circumstances are not of their choosing. A lot of these veterans came home with a lot more baggage than I did. I've dealt pretty well with my PTSD and my other challenges as a result of my service in the Army. But a lot of the veterans have had a lot harder time than I try to do a little bit. I do a clothing drive I started 2 years ago. I was at the VA hospital for just for a regular semi-annual visit at my doctor. And this young lady, I assume she was a volunteer, she came into the clinic area and she was pushing a veteran in a wheelchair. And this gentleman it was pretty obvious that he had had better days. He was trying to be kind here. He was shabbily dressed. His personal hygiene needed help, and he needed a haircut. He had a long straggly beard, and she was looking for the showers. The gal that was pushing him, and the ladies at the registration desk were talking to her. And about that time my doctor came out, and I had to disappear with my doctor. Came back out, that veteran was gone. And on my way home, I got to thinking about that. I thought, yeah, why did, I should have went up to that registration desk, and I could have gone over to Walmart and spent $100, and I could have got a new pair of jeans and a shirt and 3-pack of underwear and a 3-pack of t-shirts for that guy, and maybe even a pair of shoes for, I don't know, $100, but whatever it took. But I didn't think about it fast enough, and that bothered me, and then a little while later I got to thinking about that more, and anyway, I did a clothing drive. Just kind of people I knew, people in my neighborhood, and we ended up with a lot of coats and shoes and jeans, and so now I'm doing that again this year.
Oh, good.
And I've already got a closet full of stuff that I got a gal at the VA, my contact person, and so I'll be taking that to her real soon.
Good.
And so it's but I just appreciate the people that do support the vets, and we need more of it. Yes.
Is there a message you would like to leave for the younger generation?
It's your country now. And my generation, where we, I guess there's a lot of men and women my age that are still in positions of, that have influential positions yet. I'm not quite that old, but that generation is going to be gone, so it's going to be in your lap soon. And don't, you got to be strong. You got to make smart decisions. You got to do what's the best for. You got to take care of your neighbor. You got to do what's best for your country and your families, and it's not going to be an easy task. And I guess that's about it.
Anything else that you'd like to share, or you thought about while we were going through this?
Golly, I guess I came up with more stuff than I thought I would, but that was my service in a nutshell. I'm not going to talk about times behind my trigger and guys that we lost and some of those things. But I feel like I'm a better man for having served. Wasn't for everybody. I belong to several veterans organizations, American Legion, VFW, Vietnam Vets of America. And I asked a friend of mine who's a veteran if he wanted to join, and he said no, he didn't. He said no, he says I was in the Army, I did my 2 years, and I sat behind a desk at some office job. He says I don't. Basically, he said he wasn't worthy of that. And I shake my head and I tell him, I'll just call him Bill. I said, Bill, you stood in line, you raised your hand, you took the same oath that I did, that every other man and woman in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Space Force, we all took the same oath. We all went where we were told. We all did the jobs we were trained to do and ordered to do, and we did them to the best of our ability, I guess. And I said, it took all of us to make it work. And it still does. It took guys in the post office, it took guys behind the typewriter, it took guys in the mess hall, it took guys in the motor pool, it took guys flying those airplanes and keeping those ships running, and some of us had to pull the trigger. Other guys, it took all of us, no matter what our job was. And they were all important.
Yeah, every position was important.
Yeah. doesn't matter if you were in the field or if you were in the mess hall, or so I guess that, and I feel very strongly about that, and I certainly never look down upon or anybody that did serve in those areas of that were not in combat, I guess.
Yep.
So
Well, thank you for taking your time to share your story with us and the recollection of your military service. Thank you for your service.
yeah, it was my pleasure to do this.